If you are black and you were raised to think that hoodoo and voodoo are like demonic, this video is going to be for you. Now, first I'm going to talk about the difference between hoodoo and voodoo, and then I'm going to bring in a little Christianity, and then I'm going to tie it all together as to how we got to where we are today with hoodoo and voodoo being so demonized, and Christianity being put up on a pedestal. So as of 2024, 92% of Africans in the continental Africa identify as either Muslim or Christian. And we can thank colonialism for that. And roughly 80% of African Americans within America identify as Christian. Now, this isn't going to be an argument of whether or not there was a slave trade, whether or not black people that are here started here and we're the real Native Americans. This is not that video. This is not a page for you. Now, the reason I mention these statistics is because before colonialism and before the Arab slave trade, Africans practiced African spirituality. We practiced ancestor veneration. We had altars. We gave offerings to said altar. We were doing community rituals. That was very deep in our culture, is African spirituality. And it wasn't just a religion. It was literally a way of life. And I have a little note here. It says, African religion cannot be separated from the everyday or the mundane. And that was by Jacob Olapona, who has a PhD in the history of religions. Now, before colonization, African spirituality was completely holistic. We as a people understood that there is a direct connection between us, this earth, and the heavens. And I'm using the word heavens very loosely. Don't get caught up with that. Now, although I'm saying African spirituality, I don't want you to think that there was just one practice. Africa is an entire continent, okay? And before they were countries, before we knew them as Nigeria, before we knew them as these countries, they were just kingdoms, they were territories. Every territory, every kingdom, every tribe had their own spiritual practice, but it was relatively the same. It was ancestor worship and it was ancestor veneration. Examples of these would be like the Yoruba, that would be southwestern Nigeria. I know Igbo is southeastern Nigeria. Zulu was southern African. Now, mind you, these spiritual practices still exist to this day. They're just not as widely practiced because of the demonization, which is the next thing I'm about to talk about. Let's talk about colonialism. So colonialism was justified because white people and Spaniards thought that, African people were uncivilized. We were living in tribes. We were living in huts. We had a weird spiritual practice. We weren't Christian. See, these were all things that was foreign and new to them, but very well culture, tradition, and heritage for us. But obviously colonialism won that battle because here we are today. But to go back, let's stay in the time frame. All right, so we're in the 13 to 1400s. Spain has went up to Northern Europe and said, hey, there's black people south of the Sahara. They are running wild like animals. They'd be a great catch to be slaves. If we catch them now, we can enslave them. They need our guidance, and their guidance came under the guise of Christianity. They went so far as to create a slave Bible. Now, right here is where I'm going to stop. I need y'all to understand. I actually am Christian, but I'm also a spiritual Christian. I practice hoodoo. I will get into that further in the video. The reason I make that disclaimer is because I don't want people to think that this is we're shitting on Christianity. Absolutely not. This is just historical fact. All right, so like I said, African spirituality was a polytheistic spiritual practice. I don't want to call it a religion because it is not a religion. It is truly a way of life. Now, Christianity, we all know, is monotheistic. If you don't know what these words mean, monotheistic is one God, just one under all, right? Polytheistic is multiple deities, multiple spirits in multiple realms, right? So an idea of this would be we have humans above us, we have the idol spirits, or what you would call like ghosts. Like if you ever see a ghost, that's an idol spirit that's lingering and hasn't really accepted that it's time to pass over. Then above them, you have the ancestors. Above them, you have angels and guides, spirit guides. Then you have elevated spirits above them, or spirit masters. Above them, you have the Orisha. And then above the Orisha, you have Olodumare, or the Most High. Now, that is just one example because, as I said, there's layers, right? And before you get to the Most High. Christianity is it's you and God. You know what I mean? There's angels, but he sends those down, and of course, it's its own religion. But I'm trying to show you that African spirituality is not a religion. This is truly a way of life. That's why it's called spirituality. Now back to colonialism. During the colonization of Africa, white people used religion as a tool of destruction. They know that African people, we weren't necessarily unified together, although we obviously knew who was African, right? But we weren't as unified and as structured as Europeans would be. Meaning you could get one large European army and and put them against the small tribe in Africa and win. But you didn't just want to do that, because these are also people that you want to enslave. You don't just want to kill them and take their land, unless you're King Leopold, but or a few other people. But anyway, the whole point was you wanted to indoctrinate a certain mindset in these people. And what better way to do that than send a whole bunch of people to these small tribes before you enslave them, and start to preach and practice and try to show them that, or tell them that what you're doing is wrong. Honoring your ancestors is wrong. This is what you're supposed to be doing. This is what we're doing up in Europe. We're practicing Christianity in Europe. We're practicing Catholicism in Europe. And believe it or not, that shit worked, because it went on for 100 and some odd years before the transatlantic slave trade happened. Now, we talk about the Muslim religion. Now, Muslim was already spread throughout Africa because of the Arab slave trade, which went on for hundreds of years before the transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic's on the west coast of Africa. The Arab slave trade was on the east coast. This Arab slave trade went on for hundreds of years, and the Muslim religion spread rapidly throughout Ethiopia and most of, East Africa. Sorry, I just had like a brain fart. I'm going to focus on Christianity in this video because 9 times out of 10 my audience is probably going to be in America and it's probably going to be Christian. All right, so boom, we went over how instead of showing up as an enemy, they showed up as a friend, as a prophet, that God sent them to put us on the right path, right? And this wasn't just 1 or 2 people. I want to put emphasis on that part because it's important. They were sending hundreds and thousands of people to these small villages. So now you're outnumbered in a way. Now it's like, well, wait a minute. Is that true? Like, is that true? Should I be doing this? And while internalizing this rhetoric that what you're doing is wrong and honoring your ancestors is wrong and doing these rituals and all these different things that you've been doing for thousands of years is wrong, you are now demonizing it. And that gets passed on. So now you have these new believers who will honestly believe whatever you say, because at first Christianity was a cult in Africa. So now you have people that have already been subdued mentally. And that's what they needed to do, was subdue us mentally. Then the physical part came in. That's when the transatlantic slave trade happened. That's when it was justified that you guys deserve slavery, because remember the Christianity I taught y'all, you guys are the sons of Ham, and Ham saw his father naked, so that you deserve this. And as crazy as it sounds, I'm not stretching. This is literally what happened. And before you call my ancestors weak-minded or anything negative, put yourself in their shoes. You can't. So let's not. But anyway, now you've subdued them mentally. It's time to subdue them physically and justify it. The thing about this is there was always a group of African people that held on to their spiritual practices, the elders. Now, of course, they were trying to kill as many elders as possible because they held that wisdom and they were keeping the community together. But there were a bunch of African people that kept those spiritual practices at heart. So when they made it to, Puerto Rico, or when they made it to Haiti, when they made it to America, they had something that they could actually cling on to, something that they knew worked, because this shit that they're teaching us is not true. This is not right. And imagine a group of a bunch of different people from different tribes practicing different spiritual practices. They all come together and they create hoodoo. But what you need to know about hoodoo specifically is that, first of all, it's 2 different things, hoodoo and voodoo. Hoodoo is African spiritual practices mixed in with a little Native American practices, because Native Americans also practice, not African, but spiritual practices. So they also were connected to the earth. They were not Christians. So it's African spiritual practices, a little Native American practice, and a lot of Christianity. The reason for the Christianity part is because it was already indoctrinated in us. And what you also have to understand is that's a different video, but Christianity isn't all wrong. It's an amalgamation of almost every single religion, but there are some weaponized points. Not going to get into that. The point that I want to make on this is hoodoo is African spirituality, a bunch of different practices, Christianity, and then also Native American, some Native American spiritual practices all together. So it's an amalgamation of those 3. That's hoodoo. Now, I may be wrong, but I was told that hoodoo was specifically created by and for African Americans. No one else can touch hoodoo but African Americans.